Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our read-along of Frank Herbert's masterpiece Dune, where the story has at last reached the beginning of its climax. A number of things have changed in the life of young Paul Atreides. We meet first as a boy at the beginning of this book. He's 3 years older. He's actually fallen in love with a Fremen woman on the planet Dune and had a child, a baby boy. And he's become the unquestioned religious leader of the Fremen people who live on Dune. Not only their war chieftain, but their messiah, their Muad'Dib. And as we learned just recently, he has also confirmed, at least to the best of his satisfaction, that he is also the Kwisatz Haderach sought by the Bene Gesserit for many generations. A man who possesses near infinite future-telling forecasting ability and also near infinite ability to reach into the past memories of his cellular makeup. So no longer, technically speaking, completely human. And we saw a factor that coalesced all of these things was Paul meeting his old instructor, Gurney Halleck, on the sands of Dune, unexpectedly. Gurney Halleck has been sticking around the planet even after the destruction of House Atreides in hopes of killing the tyrant who's been set over the planet to rule it, Beast Rabban. And the last thing in the world he's expecting is to meet the son of his old duke, in fact, his present duke. And they do. And this changes Paul's thinking in tactical ways. And once Paul has undergone the water of life ritual, once he has awakened these incredibly extrasensory powers in himself, he realizes that it's just in time, because the entire imperium of this far future society, led by the emperor himself, have traveled to Dune. Their spaceships are in orbit, sensing a clash coming from which any of them might benefit. Dune is, after all, the only place in the galaxy where can be found the spice melange, which is all important. It's incredibly addictive, it's incredibly valuable, it's incredibly rare, it's incredibly hard to find because it's guarded by giant sandworms. It lengthens life, it increases prescience if you have that tendency already. And Paul has decided that since all of those factors are in place, better to strike here. Better to take aim at the Emperor. Better to act now rather than do raids in the south or whatnot. And that's how this chapter opens. A great deal has happened behind the scenes before this chapter starts. Because this chapter starts with the Fremen and Paul looking down from hiding on the Emperor's encampment. The Emperor, Shaddam IV, has come with his soldiers, 5 legions of Sardaukar, and with his court and his ladies and his hangers-on, everybody, his hairdressers, to the ground at Arrakeen. And around his imperial spaceship, there is a makeshift city that has been deployed, with tons of aircraft, tons of soldiers and whatnot. As he comes to adjudicate what's going on here himself. The Emperor, it's important to note that when the Emperor arrives on Arrakis, he doesn't know what's happening. He is going to learn what's happening directly from the devices of Paul Atreides. Remember, in an earlier chapter, we learned that a few of the men in Gurney Halleck's smugglers' crew were actually disguised Sardaukar, disguised Imperial soldiers loyal only to the Emperor. And the Fremen capture and keep and then release a couple of those onto the plane, knowing that by Imperial call signs and whatnot, they will make their way to the Emperor's entourage and tell him what's going on. They will tell him that Muad'Dib is actually Paul Atreides, that this is actually a product of the Emperor's meddling in these affairs in order to bring down House Atreides years earlier. Paul knows all this, and so does Gurney, and so does Stilgar, the leader of the Fremen. They are watching all of this happen. They are watching as the Emperor's flying craft, his ornithopters, are bolted down tight on the landing pads. And the reason why there's a gigantic house shield over the whole of that imperial encampment is because the mother of all storms, the mother of all sand and dust storms, is approaching. These storms are the dominant natural phenomenon on the planet Dune. Even sandworms hide from them. They can strip flesh from bone and chip bone. They can eradicate all presence of anything that is caught in their path because they travel for thousands of kilometers without any resistance whatsoever, just building strength. And in the course of the chapter that we're reading today, the Fremen forecasters are constantly upgrading the status of this storm. It is a great-grandmother of a storm, a great-great-grandmother of a storm. It's a truly terrifying thing. Now, the base where the Emperor has brought his spaceship down, is in a normal basin. It's in a natural protective basin, surrounded by what is referred to as the shield wall, a gigantic mountainous massif that will protect the people in that basin from the bulk of this storm. They're still battening down the hatches because even the remnant of this storm will be incredibly powerful. But Paul has a plan. We never see this plan get worked out. We never hear anyone coming up with it or working out the logistics of it. By the time this chapter starts, this plan is well in motion, and we are told what it is. There is a convention in this far future society against the use of nuclear weapons. There's a strong convention against it. You will lose everything if you try, if you break that convention. You cannot use nuclear weapons against your enemies. That, I think, is one of a couple of ways in which this novel signals when it was written instead of when it takes place. There is no actual reason in the ethos of this future society. There is no actual reason why that convention would happen, but it's true here anyway. And Paul has atomics, and he intends to use them, but he says that he will not be breaking the convention. He's not going to use them against his enemies. He's going to use them against the shield wall. He's going to obliterate a gigantic section of the shield wall, thereby opening the Emperor's encampment up to the fury of the storm, and also one other thing. It will also open a pathway for Paul's own forces to attack the Emperor under cover of the storm. We learn all about this. We never hear this plan originated or hatched. We never hear anybody else talking about it. This is the first we're learning about it. Paul trusts that the other houses will remain neutral up in orbit. He also trusts that the Spacing Guild will mind their manners because he can destroy the spice on which they depend. The Spacing Guild doesn't just depend on the spice for wealthy commerce. The spice melange enhances their precognitive abilities to such an extent that they can plot the faster-than-light path of starships, which they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And it would be too dangerous to do. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any idea if your starship was going to materialize inside a star, inside a planet. You need to be able to know, you need to be able to see, limitedly anyway, a line into the future in order to assess the pathway, in order to make space travel possible. Without the spice, space travel is not possible. Faster-than-light space travel is not possible. In other words, an intergalactic empire is not possible. And everyone knows that. Everyone knows that all the conveniences that they rely on, all the trade, all the off-world commerce, all that would come to a halt if the spice were destroyed. And Paul Atreides knows how to destroy the spice. It's not just a question of him shooting down smugglers. He knows how to end the cycle, the natural cycle on the planet, and end the spice, end the appearance of any spice. And he knows that the guild knows this. So all he's concerned with is the Emperor's response. Once the Emperor learns the lay of the land, what will he do? And that's basically the action of this chapter, because they are waiting for those captured and released Sardaukar to make their way to the Emperor's encampment. And once they do, and they can tell from the hubbub of activity there, once those Sardaukar reach the Emperor and presumably tell him, we don't know this. We are stuck on that rock outcrop with Paul and Gurney and Stilgar. We don't move anywhere else in this chapter. Once the Emperor's forces learn this, well, then it will be a question of call or raise. What will the emperor do? And Paul has two plans. If the emperor plants the Atreides flag outside his encampment, well, then he is signaling to the people he knows perfectly well are watching that has sided with the Atreides to right their wrongs against their enemies, in which case the plan will be attack the Harkonnens. Just them. But the emperor doesn't do that. He doesn't plant his own flag either, and he doesn't plant the Harkonnens' flag. He plants the Chom flag, Choam, a massive multi-planet financial conglomerate that is not very well defined in the course of the novel Dune, but as one onlooker notes correctly in this chapter, that flag connotes profit. That flag is a clear declaration from the Emperor, not to Paul and his waiting Fremen, but to those ships in orbit, that I stand for profit here. So the original plan can go through, not just the Harkonnens, but the Emperor as well. And as the chapter moves on in intensity, the storm is coming, and all the Fremen are warning Paul, you have to get into cover. These storms are nothing to mess around with. They will kill you. They don't care if you're the Mahdi. Paul lingers on that rock outcrop just long enough to receive a garbled transmission. One of his men receives a garbled transmission. There has been a raid on the Fremen stronghold in this area. And through the we're not getting every word, we're getting phrases here and there. Through the garbled transmission, we learn not only that Paul's sister, Alia, just a little girl, has been taken captive by the Imperial forces, but also that Paul's son, Leto, has been killed. His little baby boy has been killed. And Paul just takes it. Frank Herbert, in this chapter, as in so many other chapters in this book, fills Paul's reaction to pretty much everything with all kinds of adolescent self-pity. I find this repulsive myself, but I guess it's natural for the character. And it stills him, but it doesn't change anything. The plan is now going to go into effect, aided by this plan to explode the shield wall, aided by a natural force, this gigantic sandstorm, and aided by the natural ferocity of the Fremen, who can overcome the Sardaukar when the time comes. So the chapter leaves off there, and we will, in the next two chapters, we will see what comes of this. We will get to the climax of the book. So I'll wrap this up for now, and we'll come back next time. Thank you, BookTube.